No.
Good afternoon. The Fairfield Foundation, an archaeology, education, and historic preservation organization in Gloucester, Virginia, was established in the year 2000 by David Brown and Thane Harpole. David will be speaking at the end of this presentation. This is Fairfield's 25th year, but from the beginning, Dave and Thane have worked to convey the whole story of the people at the Fairfield plantation landscape, which was settled in the mid-17th century, one of the oldest Virginia land grants north of the York River. We now operate two other former residences and agricultural properties on the north side of the York River, Rosewell Plantation, with its present manor ruin built beginning in 1725, and Timbernet Farm, with its residence begun around 1793. Discussions with the present-day descendant community were and continue to be key to telling the whole story of these plantation landscapes. While connections have been made over the years, important growth has been made in the last few, following connections with historic Antioch Baptist Church leadership and the formation of the Fairfield Family Circle, an affiliate group of Coming to the Table. Today, we want to tell you about Piney Swamp. Located on the edge of Fairfield Foundation's 19th century core, it's an area of Black resistance, Black landedness, and continuing cooperative research and shared interest. Our presenters will walk you through this process. First, we have Nathaniel Glasgow. He's going to be online, virtual. Fairfield's GIS technician, who has spent a great deal of time connecting the dots by studying historic maps and by walking through and observing the landscape. Next, Darold Cuba is a Gloucester native, a member of the Fairfield Family Circle, and a doctoral candidate at Cambridge University. His dissertation work has involved marronage and Black landedness in freedom colonies and areas similar to Piney Swamp. He will provide background and perspective on our topic areas, similar topic areas. Apostle Markita Brooks is pastor of Antioch Christian Fellowship, which meets in the historic Antioch Baptist Church. We called on her several years ago to support a grant application we were writing to further Fairfield's research on Piney Swamp and the community that grew out of former Fairfield plantation. And our association has led to a great cooperative venture, which she will discuss further. And finally, Dr. David Brown, who has been thinking about and looking forward to this new research and cooperative effort for a quarter of a century now. Doesn't look that old, does he? He will be wrapping up by explaining avenues for possible work in the future. So our story begins with Nathaniel.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes. Yes.
All right, well, first of all, I'm very sorry I can't be there in person to join you all, but I really want to thank the Lemon team for getting it together so I could still come and present to you all. So thank you, Sara, for that. All right. We're on the first slide here.
Sorry. This is the first time we've done it with some virtual lecture, so I'm gonna put this in here. We might not be able to see you when you're presenting. I'm sorry, but we'll see you during the question and answer. How about that?
All right. Am I good?
Good.
All right. Yep. So the War of 1812 was really a significant time of upheaval for African Americans in Gloucester County, as well as the rest of Virginia. The slave trade began seeing more enslaved people being sent further down south. And a lot of Black people in Virginia were desperate for change. British forces that were in the region, in the Chesapeake Bay and other waterways, these British forces felt that they could, there was exploitation going on. Um, if runaway enslaved people were freed and recruited by the British, they could have aided in navigation. They could have, created disarray among the actual American ruling class of the time. And I think a lot of these people may have been remembering the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina, Gabriel's Rebellion, Gabriel Prosser near Richmond, which was about 10 years before War of 1812. Um, and in 1813, an enslaved Black man named Sam was put on trial at the Gloucester County Courthouse. The prosecution stated that Sam feloniously, willfully, maliciously, with force and arms, broke and entered the smoke and meat house of Augustine Olivier, where he carried away a large quantity of bacon, beef, salt, and herring. The prosecution had called Sam the most notorious villain that ever lived and accused him of having conducted robberies for years. But one thing Fairfield that we're very interested in is, where did all this take place? What are their specifics? These were real events that happened long ago, but without that real world connection, you lose some of that importance, some of that significance. So at its peak, Fairfield encompassed the Fairfield plantation was thousands of acres, and it was one of many, massive seats of power in the county. These massive plantations along the north side of the York, they were all rich with wealth and resources, and they were all deeply embedded into the systems of slavery. So if we can go to the next slide here. Let's see, there we go. So looking at the case with Sam, he was not acting alone. The record has it that he was joined by runaways named Brister, Jim, Michael. There were two women, first names unknown, and Ned. These people were referenced by their enslaver, such as Lewis Williams, John Catlett, and several others. The reason why this is important is because with the names of the enslavers, we can potentially find where these plantations were and create a map telling the story. So as the story goes, Sam and his band were found. Sam and the other runaways were found encamped at a place called Piney Swamp. And just to give you all some context, this isn't, quite like the perennially wet swamps, in the Everglades in Florida, but this is sort of a big, thick wooded area. Lots of pine trees. It's not great for agriculture, and it's massive. It's hundreds of acres. So one wonders, had Sam and his fellows heard of the fugitive slaves down in the Great Dismal Swamp, Maroons, who were also, sort of these these seats of Black resistance out in the swamps. Um, Piney Swamp may not be quite like the Great Dismal Swamp, but it's sort of a shadow. It's this gap in between, different spaces. Um, so the Fairfield, we're very interested in using maps to try to tell some of these stories. We're definitely not finished with it, but so far what we've been able to determine is that it looks like Sam and his cohorts came from all over Gloucester County, and they all converged at Piney Swamp. So we wonder, how did they know each other? How did they end up in Piney Swamp? What is this story, and how does it relate to other instances of? Um, and so we know Sam was tried in court. We know he was not acting alone, but he and his band were also not acting alone. Black resistance during this period was all taking place all over coastal Virginia, and this startled many of the aristocratic whites. The same year as Sam's trial, Major Nathaniel Burrell wrote to the governor, "We are threatened with an insurrection of our Negroes. 10 have been apprehended and are in jail for examination." Burrell was of the same family of the Fairfield plantation. Piney Swamp, in fact, was a big part of the Fairfield lands. So this was a very present thing for them. So we can go to the next slide. So this is a map on the left. You'll see this is an 1893 post office application map, and it doesn't look like much, but when you look closer, those are words, those are letters, those are names of people. This is a highly detailed map, and it has been really revolutionary and a lot of research in the Fairfield Piney Swamp area. Um, it's sort of in my opinion, a lot of the later maps are very, they're very accurate. They're very consistent. They're almost kind of sterile. They give you the information geographically, but they don't really tell you who's living where and why does that matter. But this map here, although it's not very accurate geographically, and believe me, I've tried to overlay that onto a current map, it tells us so much data. Both Black and white families are shown here. And thank you to Bill Lawrence for creating the map on the right that actually types out the names, so it's a little bit easier to understand. Next slide, please. And so this is another map we like to look at. This is called the Folks map. It's not quite as accurate, well, I should say it's not quite as detailed as the Bridges post office map, but it gives us a very unique county-wide snapshot in time. All of these old roads are up here. In the 1930s in particular, the not VDOT, but the precursor to VDOT, they had road improvements that really dramatically altered what Virginia looked like prior to that. Roads were straightened out. Roads were cut across creeks differently. You lose a lot of that historic landscape. Um, and why we care about this is because the older maps, from this era are actually sort of a good launching point for imagining how Gloucester and its people would have moved around hundreds of years ago, trying to figure out where these old road beds are. What are these old viewscapes? And if we go to the next slide, kind of continuing with the theme of roads and these broad landscape changes. Gloucester. The county as it is today is really a massive change from when Sam lived in Gloucester County over 200 years ago. Um, this image was created with the 1906 topographic map. We just overlaid it over the current day and we traced out where all the old roads were at the time. And you'll notice some consistency, but you'll notice a lot of areas, a lot of spaces of existence of people's lives are gone. They're not used anymore. And we're very interested in trying to get as many stories told as we can. Um, and we have buildings as well can be overlaid using the same technology. Um, there are lots of old buildings that still stand from the time when Sam was around. And there's a lot that aren't. And so it's just a matter of trying to piece together as much as we can. A lot of these structures, the topographic maps, give us, evidence for where they were, but you wouldn't necessarily have this information outside of that. So here we have an 1890, I believe, three or eight, yeah, 1890s era plat of the Fairfield Plantation. So it originally was a over 2,000 acre patent, but it was reduced dramatically over time, ended up being around 200 acres or so, a little bit over 200 acres now. So this plat you're looking at here shows the sort of the southern half of sort of one of the later phases of Fairfield, everything south of Fairfield Lane. Um, and a lot of this was sold by the Levitt family to settle debts in the 1890s. But a lot of these tracts were sold to Black families. Many of these families were formerly enslaved at Fairfield and nearby plantations, but quite a few people moved to the area from elsewhere in the county. There's evidence in the early 20th century that there was an influx of African American people moving to this area. Next slide, please. So the star, well, the star is actually missing from that image. My apologies. And then in the upper right corner of the red area, you will see where historic Antioch Baptist Church is located. It's now Antioch Christian Fellowship, and we'll hear a little bit more about that shortly. It's the oldest structure in the Piney Swamp community. The church was built and organized around 1922 and is essentially at the core of this historic community. We think that the church may have been built at the intersection of a very important area, potentially an abandoned road which paralleled Fairfield Lane and went all the way to the wharf. And so we're very interested in seeing if we can establish a historic uh, Black presence in this area. Next, please. And here you have, this is looking at the plat we looked at a few slides back, and this is an overlay. This is to show you how much information we can get and learn about these Black areas, these sort of hidden communities. And we can recreate these landscapes. And obviously, um, not everything is certain. There's a lot of margin for error with this, but it's a really amazing thing. Next slide, please. And here we have, this is from a booklet Fairfield Foundation did in 2009. And basically what we did was we looked at all these historic deeds and recreated where the actual land tracts were. And this is that sort of the northern half of part of the core of the Fairfield plantation. Um, and if you will go to the last slide in my section, and here we're looking at um, that same map, but broken down by race, trying to figure out where these areas are and how the main part of the plantation, the biggest part was still white owned, 1880s, 1920s, but it's a really it's using GI. Piney Swamp is really it's one example of a side of Black resistance, and we're really interested in using GIS technology to tell Sam's story and to pull more out of it. Um, the events in the story, has led to the development of all these communities over time, and they persist today. And thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from everybody else.
Yeah, there's a podium mic, but you can also use that one.
Thanks so much, Nathaniel. So I'll sort of situate Piney Swamp in the historiography, particularly after the Civil War. My research focuses on the types of Black communities that came about after emancipation that I start to call it Black landedness. So my dissertation looks at what I'm calling United States post-emancipation marronage. Post-emancipation marronage is a term that my Cambridge dissertation supervisor, Hank Gonzalez, sort of put forth in his 2019 book, Maroon Nation, where he said that Haiti was a bunch of maroon villages after their revolution, which really didn't come together sort of as a unified force until Napoleon sent the slave ships to re-enslave them. So I applied that to the United States after the Civil War, looking at sites like Piney Swamp as post-emancipation marronage. But these were Black people who were still running away from the white supremacy that the United States was systemically institutionalized and structured society, particularly Jim Crow apartheid and all the other sort of racist things that the US did. So one of my case studies is Schenkelville, Texas, which got a little bit of national sort of attention with Michael Strahan, Good Morning America's host, and of course NFL Hall of Famer, on Skip Gates, Dr. Henry Louis Gates, Finding Your Roots, a PBS show. Schenkelville was verified to be where his ancestors, Jim and Winnie Schenkel, sort of created this community in 1867. and it's one of my case studies for my dissertation. There's an amazing love story that Jim and Winnie Schenkel had. They were born enslaved on a plantation in Mississippi. Winnie had already had 3 children that were quote unquote mixed race by different masters. But Jim and Winnie got married, and then Winnie was sold or was taken away from that plantation because the owner's daughter got married to a Methodist minister who brought a plantation on the border of Louisiana and Texas. And so this is 400 miles away from Mississippi. And somehow Jim got to that plantation. Now there's an amazing family story of fording the Mississippi and the Sabine rivers and escaping plantation slave catchers. And there's a whole bunch of documentaries online you can see about that. But they accumulated property post-emancipation and built this amazing community that out of Shankleville grew, well, let's say 4 or 5 communities that are documented, but there's about 20 communities in Texas that came out of Shankleville. So this freedom colony that Texas actually caused these types of Black towns, there are about 550 that we found to this day. And in 2005, Tad Sinton and James H. Conrad, 2 white men, actually started to document these communities in Texas in this book, Freedom Colonies. So that's how Piney Swamp comes into this. Piney Swamp is one of, we think about 5,000 Black towns in the US that were sort of these post-emancipation Marronage communities after the Civil War. Of course, located in Gloucester County, where I happen to grow up, and on the Middle Peninsula. But we don't really hear much about freedom colonies, right? There again, 550 when I started this. This is my 3rd graduate degree. It was a media story that I was trying to get my employer to tell. And they actually said, so, well, my editor said, son, that's a dissertation. And I was not trying to do any grad school, but 3 degrees later, here I am. And it was because these editors, I'll name them, the New York Times, could not get their head around the fact that so many of these Black communities existed. Again, 550 we found in Texas, 5,000 at least in the States itself, many more in Canada and Mexico, all throughout the colonized world. And what I call Black landedness was a reaction to the fact that many historians, when they talked about Black people after the Civil War, they talked about the rise of sharecropping, debt slavery, the neo-plantation, the Black landlessness, right? All the things that Black people experienced that was negative. So there was the idea that in the history department, in the history tradition at least, that Blacks were degraded, and there was no real sort of landed communities that existed within the Jim Crow reality. So this, of course, takes us to why this is, and we have to go back to the invention of whiteness and the invention of racism. I think we probably all know about the European feudalism, where the European colonizers imported sort of their class system, creating race as the newest rung, which allowed their lower classes, their peasants, to be able to now feel better or feel above everyone else. They may have not had a pot to piss in, but once they got to the colonies, like the US, or what became the US, they would now be white and other people would be now not white. So this created a racialized pyramid scheme of descending privileges, access, opportunities, and resources that were given to people racialized as white. And this became white supremacy because these would become, terrorism and threats to people who were racialized as not white. And if you were racialized as Black through a hypodescendancy, a one drop rule, you would be enslaved in this pigmentocratic slaveocracy. So that brings us to the Civil War and Reconstruction. So even though the Civil War ended the physical enslavement of Black people, African Americans participated in record numbers in the sort of Reconstruction era, but then Reconstruction ended and Jim Crow apartheid became the sort of system of the US until we knew the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act. But landed Blackness is something that, again, I started to sort of call these types of communities, but this work comes out of Dr. Andrea Roberts' Texas Freedom Colonies Project, which back in 2014, when she was still a PhD student at the University of Texas, she founded the Freedom Colonies Project. And I sort of met her when I was trying to convince my editors that this is a bigger story. She said that Sidney Conrad said, and she built on the idea that these were places that were usually unplatted and usually unincorporated, but they were individually unified by churches and schools and a residents' collective belief that such a community existed. They were these free Black spaces that were sort of created by Black people to counteract the efforts to decimate the Black communities, or decimate the Black community. So my research has taken me to sort of find all these communities. This is a very early map back in my first degree and as an oral history master's student, where I started to try to map all these spaces in the world. So at Cambridge, I've created this sort of digital humanities lab called MarronageOrg, the MarronageOrg Organizing Project Lab, which identifies, documents, and organizes all of these spaces pre and post emancipation in the world. So we have the idea of a Marronage World History Trail that would be supported by UNESCO. There's a Mapping Freedom Initiative that really wants to map all these spaces in this entirety or in their entirety, and an International Association of Freedom Colonies, a sort of Marronage network, and an oral history archives that we want to make sure we capture the descendants' stories of their ancestors. So the Marronage World History Trail has taken us through not just, again, post-emancipation, but also pre-emancipation, where, again, marronage was the act of running away from slavery. If you've been to Brazil or heard about the Colombos and the Macombos, and Colombia, they're called Palenques. In Jamaica, they actually call them Maroons, but there existed many different types of communities of Maroons, of Black people, of enslaved people, and even some indigenous and some Europeans who would run away from the colonial project and create their own spaces. So the Marronage Archives uses a community-based archives, which is what Piney Swamp or Fairfield has used to sort of help build the historiography of Piney Swamp. Now this is unique because most archives in the West, or all archives in the West, did not treat Black people as and Black stories as stories worth documenting. So there is an alternative venue for these communities to make collective decisions about what is of enduring value to them, and to shape collective memories of their own past, and to control the means through which these stories about their past are constructed. Michelle Caswell at the South Asian, Michelle Caswell sort of has come up with this idea of community-based archives that that Fairfield has started to use when doing work, the research on Piney Swamp. But these are international stories, because marronage happened wherever colonizers went. I mentioned Palenque in Colombia. There's Barack Obama, sort of one of the historic celebrations that San Basilio de Palenque sort of puts on every year. Old Nanny Town in Jamaica is a very famous maroon town. In Canada, there's Africville. The singer Dan Hill, his ancestors were from there, and he actually wrote a song about this Nova Scotian Black town. Weeksville in New York, if you guys watch the TV show Gilded Age, or The Gilded Age on HBO by Julian Fellows, he said he's going to include more about Weeksville in this upcoming season. Lena Horne's family was one of these residents there, Hornes and the Calhouns. Famously, Weeksville was the site of the Black 400. You might have heard of the 400 in Manhattan, where the Vanderbilts and the high society elites created high society. Weeksville was sort of the Black counterparts of that in Brooklyn. Shanksville, Texas, Palmeiras in Brazil. There are many of these communities all around the world. So I think this is it for me, but anybody if you want to contact me, there's my email address.
Right, well, I am excited to be talking to you guys. And I am a preacher, so I'm timing myself because I could be here all day. I'm Apostle Markita Brooks, and I lead a ministry called The Truth and the Spirit. We actually just started, we just celebrated our 24th ministry anniversary. It's a global apostolic ministry. And we recently, in 2022, became the stewards of the historic Antioch Baptist Church. And so I'm actually the 5th pastor of Antioch. And so, you know, we look back at this history, and I'm gonna be going back and forth with my slide just to let you guys know. If we look back at this history, the first pastor, John Thomas, J.T. Barnes, would have been the pastor in 1922 when the church was built. This is less than 60 years after Emancipation Proclamation. So clearly there would have been people who had experienced slavery who were part of this original congregation. Then the second pastor would have been Reverend Lincoln. The third pastor is Pastor Bird, who you can see in this picture, Antioch 1965. If you're looking from your right, you see there's a well-dressed lady in white with the black gloves. Right beside her is the First Lady. So there's the First Lady right there, and there is Reverend Bird. And so just blessing God for, just collecting this history. Before he died, he asked a couple who was a part of Antioch with him, Leonard and Medina Marble, to become the pastors and leaders of the ministry. And they, on his deathbed said yes. And they pastored for decades, really just doing some amazing things in Gloucester, where there was not a whole lot of moves of the spirit. There wasn't a lot of women in ministry. They're leading together. And Medina, actually, I set her apart as an apostle, and she's moving in apostolic, and she's moving as a ministry leader, where people in that area were not even seeing women as leaders. And so during COVID, the COVID shutdown, she actually contracted COVID and almost died. So when she comes out of it, as the truth and the spirit is her covering and I'm her covering, she asked us to take over the building. And so this is how I become the 5th pastor of Antioch, of the historic Antioch Baptist Church. And so, as I'm gonna go back to this picture, because you can see Antioch there at the bottom of the screen. One of the things that was really important to me as a ministry leader is that there is a cemetery behind the church. It's not just a church, it's a church with a cemetery. And so we've got graves that go back to the early 20th century. And stewarding it, because some of it was a little in disrepair, and every time the leadership changed, all of the history, all of the documentation, all the, the administrative documents didn't all get passed on to the next leader. And so I'm trying to, collect information because I want to steward this. Well, this is holy ground. I want to steward it well, and I want to make sure that, those who are buried there are well documented, because they have family members in the area and some outside of the area who want to be buried next to their family members. And so this is information that I need, but I don't have it. And so Pastor Medina connected me with the Fairfield Foundation. And they actually were instrumental, and we continue to do this work, like it's not done. They've been instrumental in helping us to really steward that part, the cemetery, so that we can care for those who are buried there, care for their memories, honor their memories, and welcome their family members back. Because when the ministry, every time the church changed leadership, people in the community, because it really is a staple in the community. It's a landmark. It's a symbol of what has happened and how the community has grown. The families who've been invested in Antioch for generations always wonder, am I still going to have access to my family members who are buried out back? Am I still going to be able to call this home? And, all these questions arise, because it's like, well, things have shifted. How is this going to look going forward? And so it's very important to me, very important to all of us, that we let those family members know that we are stewarding what we know to be historic and holy, and we're welcoming them to not just come back and honor their dead, but to also see Antioch as their home. And so with the Fairfield Foundation last year, we had what we called Antioch Week, August 1st through 5th, where we really invited descendants of those who are buried in the back, and the family members in the area who were invested in Antioch and in the region, not just in Antioch, but in this historic region, to come back to Antioch. Oral histories were collected. They've been archived here. Isn't it an archive here? The oral histories have been archived here in Mary, so that we could really collect some of these stories that maybe weren't written down, on paper, but those who are still alive, we wanted to, capture what they knew, what their parents told them, what their grandparents told them. So they were really collecting this history of this historic church. And so in addition to that, during Antioch Week, we also had what I call healing circles, because our outreach branch of the Truth and the Spirit is called the Invitation Movement. And it has its own website. You can visit it, invitationmvmt.org. And so we focus on healing, peace, and justice. And in the healing piece, we have healing circles, because it's a safe, sacred space where we can address challenging things and then come out healed. And so we had one, because we were there 3 nights. Oral histories happen throughout the, April, August 1st through 5th, but 3 nights, Friday, Saturday, and we're also there Sunday afternoon. We had a healing circle each day. And so we looked at slavery and enslavement and the effects on the community here, the effects on the descendant populations, the families, and really to facilitate healing between both groups. Because the reality is the institution of enslavement put everybody into bondage. And that's the only way, to keep a man down in a hole, you have to get down there with him. And so our whole community needs healing. And so, we were speaking about it, praying into it, meditating on it. And then we created our quilt, which you see here in the middle, where people just contributed things that were meaningful to them about Antioch, about their family, as a kind of a way of bringing us together as a community, because that's really what it's all about. We want to honor those who established this foundation. We want to reconcile between not just the descendants, but those who are in the community, because it's bigger than just the descendants of those who are part of this church. And we want to incite unity in the community, which is a real blessing. And so I'm going to go back. Actually, I can stay here. Do you see the picture of me and Sara over on the far right? And that's right. When I was first approached by the Fairfield Foundation, being African-American and Native, I also have Native American blood. And I'm connecting with them, and I'm excited about what they want to do. But I was hesitant, I'm paying attention, because I do know that archaeology in the United States has a history of not necessarily honoring the past the way the cultural groups that are a part of it would prefer to be honored. Does that make sense? And so I'm watching to see, what they do. I didn't tell you all that, but I was definitely watching to see, are they really going to honor those who came before, or is it just kind of cerebral, scientific? And I have been so blessed. I've been so blessed because they don't assume that they know how people want to be honored. There's actually been this bringing together of the descendants of slaves and descendants of enslavers in what's called Family Circle, where there's these Zoom meetings every month, which I'm actually a part of. I'm on the leadership team helping to plan this. There's just the healing that's happening, conversations that's happening, DNA is being tested, and people find out that they've got cousins and family members, and some of them actually met each other at Antioch Week. They're meeting their family members and their cousins. And these conversations are occurring, which is really bringing that reconciliation and that healing. And so we don't have all the info that we'd like to have about Antioch and the Piney Swamp area. But what blessed me is that, they're looking to kind of get this area declared as a historic area. There has to be one historic building there. And Antioch is the one historic building. And so for me, it's like to steward something like that with that history, and that can allow this entire region to be declared historic so they can continue to discover stories like the story of Sam, find out more about his rebellion and what he did, and find out more about those who built this church and who were part of this region and the families that contributed to this. It blesses me that Antioch can be a part of that. And so the model that we're looking at, because they steward other plantations as well. So they steward what was the Fairfield Foundation. They also steward what was the Roswell plantation. And so we have just really worked together in this area. It's right in the same area because they were, neighboring plantations. It's not necessarily Piney Swamp, but it is a neighboring plantation. And so they've actually been building a slave memorial, which would have been like the structure of what a slave house would have looked like on that Roswell plantation, because none of those exist on the Roswell plantation right now. But what is still there is the remnants of the Roswell mansion. And I say mansion because it was built, that house, the house at the Roswell plantation was built to rival the governor's mansion in Virginia. And it did. It was bigger, more elaborate. It was huge. And it's because this region, when we look at this region, this is the first region of America. And so, if you were in the previous group, the session that was right before this one in this room, they talked about how slaves went out from Richmond all over the United States. But those slaves that went out from Richmond came up from this region. They came up from this region to Richmond to be shipped all over the United States. Does that make sense? And so we see that there's some very important things about what happened in this area. And so they're building this memorial structure so that people can come and really learn more about not just those who own the plantation, because we have a lot of information about them, but those who are enslaved there and who worked the plantation. Before the structure was built, they actually came and asked the descendants of those who've been enslaved. They asked me as the steward of Antioch, what should we do before we build the structure? And that was the blessing, because we do want to do some things before we build the structure. And so we prayed over the ground. We blessed the ground. I actually had communion with that's me at the bottom. I actually had communion with the land to address the innocent blood that was shed there, and then poured out libation to honor those who came before and who died there. We had a drum procession there. We had a drum procession back. It was very, everybody was crying. There was not a dry eye in the place. We prayed for the descendants of the enslaved, the descendants of the enslavers. Like, it was a real blessing. History was spoken. Names of slaves that were listed as property were spoken out. Like, it was really an amazing time. And I remember telling Dave afterwards, I was like, you guys have been listening. You guys, this is the evidence you've been listening. And that to me sets Fairfield apart. Because like I said, being Black and Native, I've seen a lot of archaeological things that just haven't blessed us, haven't really honored us the way we want to be honored. Was there information discovered? Absolutely. But the way certain populations want to be honored, that is not always understood by other populations. And the only way that we can come to a place where we actually do honor and reconcile and we move in unity is that we have to have the conversations. We have to come to the table. In the last family circle, Darold actually was talking about, I think it's one coming up, vocabulary, language, words, that we need to use, because this is a tough topic. It really is. And for African Americans, this is really a huge part of our history that affects our community today. Most people who are not a part of the African American community do not understand that. Oh, well, it's over. There's no, it affects us today. Our diet, our health, our family structure, everything is affected. Our finances, our view of ourselves and this nation, all is still affected by slavery. And so when we come to the table, we go straight there. That's what we want to talk about. And it's important that that's understood, because oftentimes our white counterparts kind of pull away from that for fear that we're going to point the finger, we're going to be angry, we're going to blame. The truth is, we all just want healing. But we can't have healing if we don't have the discussions. And the work, the research that's being done by Fairfield Foundation is leading to some amazing discussions. And that really blesses me that we can be a part of that. And I'm really blessed by them. And so if you guys don't mind, we can just give them a round of applause. They're doing the work. They're doing the work. And I would venture to say that they're a model for archaeology in the United States. Because like I said, it doesn't happen like this in every other community, in every other area, but it should. And so we're all blessed. Everybody's been blessed. We're coming together, and let me go back. We're going to have another one, but instead of calling it Antioch, there's a reason the name has changed. It's because Antioch Baptist Church started what is now a tradition in Gloucester through all the churches, a week called Homecoming, where the goal was, or at least a weekend, to bring people back who had been there before. But we're doing it this year. You see the dates there, June 27th and 28th, not just for those who maybe were members of the ministry, have family members who are buried there, but people who are part of this Piney Swamp community, people who are descendants from those who are part of this Piney Swamp community, those who are just from the region, even bringing up the churches to the table. The goal is to really bring us together as a community to look at this historic area that has made a difference, not just in Virginia, but it's actually affected the entire United States. And so you can actually go to AntiOchGloucester.org. That's the website, AntiOchGloucester.org. So we'll actually be posting this poster that you see right here, the one on the right, on that website. You can go to FairfieldFoundation.org. FairfieldFoundation.org. They'll have the continuing information there as well. The family circle information is there so that you can get involved and you can connect. And so that's the end of my spiel. I'm going to turn to my last one. Nope, that was one more. That's the structure. I knew that was one more. That's the structure that's been built on the Rosewell plantation. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Okay, thank you so much. Not only to Nathaniel and to Sara, but most especially to Markita and Darold. It's an honor for me to be here. This is my first Lemon Symposium, which is embarrassing because I should have been here frequently and for a while. I've had the honor of knowing Jody, who almost all of you know, and Sara and folks for a long time. And I think even my just turned teenager son has been more involved in certain things than I have on this, and he's just 13. So it is just a wonderful thing to be here today. So thank you for welcoming all of us. I'm going to do my best to try to make it the smallest part of the presentation because my co-presenters have really informed me on a great many things, and I'm so proud to be a part of this. But I really would just like to elevate and see them shine for all of the hard work that they've done. So let me round out with just a couple of observations, the things that have come to mind as I've listened. Sometimes you learn when you're going through these processes that having a good sense of things, having a hope is sometimes enough. We knew from the beginning that we kind of didn't understand a lot of what we were doing when it came to communications with community and trying to build community without trying to dominate community. We wanted to be a part of something. We didn't want to be the only thing. Early on in the first 2 decades of the work that we did, we wanted to present an openness, and we were engaging with people who we would meet in the history circles. But we didn't do as much of the effort as we could have if we were to reach out to congregations, if we were to reach out to civic groups. And so we really benefited from change of approach about 5 years ago, which coincides with Sara and others kind of really emphasizing a more active engagement approach. That just opened our ears more than we had before. We had always been open to understanding, but now we were truly getting to sit down at a table and seeing some years of just being patient and engaging on individual bases flourishing into more of a broad engagement with larger groups. And that's led us to a position now where we feel like we can be both advocates, but also advisors, helping those who have interests in their worlds, and then providing everything from technical assistance to just being another listening ear that helps. So what our recently most proud accomplishments are beyond even projects like this is helping out with the African American Cemeteries Fund that's provided by the Department of Historic Resources. Just having enough expertise to help congregations get access to things that they want, which certainly just means taking down barriers of access and not guiding, but rather just being there to answer questions. Because sometimes congregations have everything they need. They don't need our help. Other times they need a little help. Sometimes they need a lot of help, and being there for them when they have an idea of what they want has always been a great honor for us. And it creates more of an equal basis by which we have discussions. And I think that has what led to moments like today. To be specific with Fairfield and with Piney Swamp, and with understanding that we have many different communities over time that are within one landscape, means that we have all of these different things that are worthy of preservation. And at my heart, I'm a preservationist. I'd like to think of myself as an archaeologist, but also an anthropologist, also a humanist, or a humanities scholar, as Virginia Humanities likes to brand things. But mostly I'm a preservationist, and I think of that in almost a lowercase p kind of definition, which means everything, because I have a hard time making decisions. And so ultimately, if I say yes to everything, I may go insane, or may have already gotten there. But ultimately, you might do a little bit of good for a whole lot of trying. So what you see in the map on your right is kind of a technical way of looking at preservation that our initiatives have always been trying to get onto the table for discussion, but not with a preconceived notion of an end goal. What I mean by that is sometimes this is about opening up ideas and having discussions that start from a seed that you plant, but without an expectation that that tree will grow in that location or in that form. Not at least by just a single person's idea. This is about collectively looking at future. And we stand on the backs of, on the shoulders of many of our colleagues who have been pioneering this. So Fairfield as a model, I'd love that to be a credit. But ultimately, we have gotten inspiration by so many others. Our friends at Montpelier, for instance, they're a major influence on us and how we look forward, but also Highland and other places in Virginia, some of the scholars at the College William and Mary as well, and obviously the Lemon Project. So what you see in a technical way on your right is a bunch of polygons on a map. In many ways, they're kind of meaningless, but they show boundaries. And what they show to me is big and small. So sometimes you have lines that represent features on a landscape, a road, a ditch, something fairly simple, but it's tangible, it's accessible, it's something that everyone can connect with. Other times they're entire open agricultural fields. It's where we found artifacts or where we know that boundaries in the past have expressed something on paper that is his or hers, white or black. Still others are areas that are more environmental than they seem to be cultural, but we all know that the distinction between environmental and cultural is really not something that will ever truly be able to disconnect from one another. And so when we use maps like this, it's mostly to fight against a bureaucracy that is still stuck understanding things in terms that are dated and uninformed or ill-informed. And so we make strong arguments about how traditional cultural knowledge, about how people define things in communities as opposed to as individuals or in academic spaces, so that we can argue definitively for the preservation of these places. We got a grant from the Virginia Outdoors Foundation to preserve acreage within the middle of Piney Swamp. And one of the biggest fights we've had is saying that it's important, even though it has no building, even though it has no map as a building is there, even though there were no artifacts that argued for it having some activity that took place there that left a remnant behind. But it was within the middle of this community. And we always argued, is that not important? Is that not significant enough? And so to round things out, we pursued some of the tools that exist in a bureaucratic world that is attempting to kind of create a structure that provides accessibility to everyone, but ultimately constrains that accessibility to only a few. And we're trying to break those down. When we do so, it's an attempt to go ahead and use the tools that exist for the purposes of community, but also to kind of change and advocate for their modification. Because when we talk about two principles in this world, one of significance and one of integrity, we're trying to convince the people who control those definitions to think more broadly and more inclusively about how we see those things. It can't be a 1960s definition. It can't even be a 2000s definition. It has to be one that moves and understands as we advocate and bring people together that these things will forever change, and that is good. Because preserving as we advocate as a community means that we will achieve a certain quality of life and improvement in how we act and how we understand and how we lead. All of that together means that this collaborative approach will produce something that will outlive us. Thank you.
Any questions?
The other question, I'll bring you the mic and then I'll pass it to whoever you're asking.
Reverend Brooks. One of your slides, you had a film icon for Silent Voices. Does that include your community in that film?
No.
Can you tell me about that?
Or I could just use my feature. So our community is not featured in the film Silent Voices. What we did in another collaborative effort is we brought the filmmakers of Silent Voices to Gloucester at the Gloucester Museum. We watched the film together. You see what I mean? We had a discussion afterward. Then in the next family circle, we had another discussion because we were really looking at, again, the language, the emotion, the research, the connections, and how that can help us moving forward. And so it was a different community feature, but it was really, it's really a blessing for any community that's trying to do this work to see where it is already happening, what they're dealing with, successes, challenges, and then build upon it, which was what our goal was. Did you want to add anything else? Any of you guys? No? Good.
Questions?
Thank you. First off, thanks to everyone. Those were really wonderful presentations, and this is really enlightening work. But my question is kind of specific and about preservation with the capital P maybe. Are you all pursuing a National Register nomination for this? Is that what the PIF is for? Or is there a different designation that you're working on? And if so, I'm really interested in like the process of that designation as an archaeological site, particularly.
So the preliminary information form is a technical document which allows us to lay a foundation. And that means when you come to the table and you talk to the community, you have skin in the game. It also communicates to certain bureaucrats and establishes a certain validity for what your argument is at a certain level, which is never to say that it's everyone's level. Because you can have community members who are just like, this is important, even if the state or the feds or even localities say, we don't think so. Because ultimately our most important audience is our local audience. So with that in mind, pursuing an historic district is a goal that would be determined if the community thought it was worth it. And so we're at a stage now where we've got enough skin in the game to say, is this something that the community wants to pursue without a timetable? Now, technically a PIF means you're good for 5 years within what they call a determination of eligibility for the national and state registers, which is fantastic because it allows us to qualify for certain grants. For instance, the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, when they went ahead and gave us funds to acquire a couple of these parcels, the premise was to go ahead and to have those parcels acquired that fit on or that were determined eligible as part of the district. And the recent changes in legislation through the state of Virginia allows those things to happen. So technical wise, yes, it would be lovely to do that. But by doing that initial amount of paperwork, it can now kind of fall onto the back burner as the community really decides if that's going to be something that they want to pursue. Because every single property owner within that larger polygon would be made aware of the pursuit. So we're not just talking about those who we engage with through Antioch or through other descendant community members. A lot of those folks are folks who moved there in 2004 and built a double wide and have been living there wonderfully ever since. And they may not have any connection to the community whatsoever, but because state and federal programs like this that acknowledge the historic or the archaeological integrity and significance of an area almost exclusively in an honorific way, meaning it doesn't tell you what you can or can't do with your property, but it does bestow an honor to you. They all get a say. And for us, that's a part and parcel with what we've done for 25 years. We worked on districts across the state of Virginia. We worked on individual properties, so we know this well. But for us, it was important to demonstrate that this is not an inevitability. This becomes an option now for the community. And for us, it's an honor to say, this is only moving forward if the community says so. Especially now that we work with certain tribes and other descendant community groups elsewhere, Middlesex County in particular, it's a great moment because now we have like a whole team of people with us instead of us just putting our nose in a book and then saying it's important. And so that to me is the most fun part of the job.
I just wanted to think that Fairfield, the archaeology site, is on the National Register, just to make that clear. But it was put on the National Register in
1970 something.
70 something, yeah. And it's just a really brief thing that would never pass muster today. But and we also think of it not just as that archaeology site, but as the whole plantation landscape, which is thousands of acres, and that's more what this is.
Wonderful presentations, very enlightening. I want to just acknowledge the Fairfield Foundation for their incredible work. My question is for Mr. Glasgow, Nathaniel. And you talked about the overlay of the properties in Piney Swamp. And the importance of that. My question to you is, have you done any work on the underlay of this area prior to 1812 in terms of indigenous landscape?
That's that's a tricky question right there. We are always trying to do more and more. I have personally not done too much in that department. I know that we have had some archaeological projects which probably broach into those areas. But it gets tricky the further back in time you go. I've spent a lot of time looking at things from the historic period, and the records, they don't go back but so far with the same level of clarity and completeness. Um, I would yield that question to Dave. I think he, because having worked with Fairfield longer, he would have maybe a better knowledge of what we've done. Thank you.
One of the best projects that we took on that was student-led and was supported by the Charles Center here at the College of William and Mary was done by Chris Gottschalk. And he was a student intern, later a staff member, who was studying the presence of archaic period Virginia Indians on the site. And his project the premise was, how do you interpret thousands of years ago indigenous occupations on sites that are inherently colonial? In other words, like, how do you shift this narrative so that when your interpretation is taking place, you're not ignoring other important groups across time? And of course, he was finding the same challenges the rest of us would find, which is you walk into the site, you're expecting a certain interpretation, and then he's trying to introduce a competing narrative. Although he never thought of it as competing, it's a complementary narrative, or it's a narrative of equal value, but also one that you're trying to respond to your audience as well as trying to inform your audience. So we've been very lucky in that we've always taken an approach archaeologically that's incorporated all evidence from all cultures across time. But we've also been lucky to work a lot with indigenous groups as they exist today, and then working with them on all of the properties that we have in order to build that community that informs us as to their experiences on our properties currently, as well as their advice on how we should interpret those cultural groups who have been there across time. Does that help?
In part, yes.
Okay, because the more difficult part is that we don't have some of the documentation that exists in the past, while also acknowledging that their existence, indigenous groups in particular, were on our properties across time always.
Yeah. So without passing the mic, more specifically, because you have such accurate information in terms of the overlay of how the community kind of was divided and subdivided after 1812, clearly there has to be some type of writing as to what the colonizers found, and they were able to determine, York County and what is now known as Gloucester, what the landscape looked like during the colonizing.
We
So
have
that's
hints.
what I want to be able to see some of it, that any of that information there.
We did patent overlays early on, which include some references to indigenous landscape components. We've done that more deeply for other sections of the county, particularly where Comoco, and in other places that wonderful information is trapped in some of the colonial or the colonizers' records. It's limited in our spot, and then the records for the county were burned twice. So we lost them in 1820, and then we lost them again in 1865. So we're at a bit of a disadvantage, whereas other counties might have more evidence. We're trying to do our best not to rely just on those pieces of evidence without overlooking those pieces of evidence.
My question was very similar to the lady that asked the question before, but specifically to the pastor. You mentioned a couple of times in your presentation your dual ethnicity or racial. What tribe is your family or you connected with? And also, how does that impact? And I think it tags on to what is happening with the indigenous part within Piney Swamp. You know, and I think the gentleman answered partially that, you know. Thank
you. My tribe is actually Eastern Band Cherokee from South Carolina. You know, many of us have moved so many times, but the Native community is small, meaning, you know, in Virginia, we all know each other. And so those whose land like that was their indigenous land, we know each other. You know, one of the elders actually prayed and blessed the land at Antioch before I came into it because that was his family's land. And then I'm also, you know, I'm friends with Chief Ann, the Rappahannock. And so, you know, her ancestry goes back to Powhatan and his confederacies in that whole area. And so there are, you know, lots of First Nation individuals who are from this land who are right here in the area, in which case they're very invested in what's happening in the area. And in some cases, I've been brought to certain tables. And in other cases, we would like to bring them more, you know, to the table. Because there's a lot that's happening with indigenous communities. And there's, you know, if you're not really a part of the indigenous community, you don't know the work that we're doing because it's not really publicized. It's not shared, but there's a lot of things that are happening to stand against some of the challenges, some of the persecution that continues to happen among First Nations. And a lot of that work is happening now. And a lot of the leaders, which blesses me, are believers. And so, you know, we're addressing things in a natural and in the spiritual realm, and which is very important because there's some things that have just carried on for years and years and years that we don't really have language for it. But it affects Native communities. Because you were talking about Native, right? That's your question? Yes, absolutely. Did I answer your question? Yes, you did. Okay, good.
Do you have any virtual questions?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to make a comment about one of the things that Nathaniel talked about. Again, I really pay attention to all of your presentations, but you were talking about Nathaniel. And you talked about, you were wondering how, you asked the question, how did Sam and his cohorts find out about, you know, Piney Swamp? And were they aware of all the other, you know, slave insurrections that were happening in the South, and slaves from Virginia were being shipped further south? There's a real deep connection between the Native community and the African community in that Gloucester County area and throughout this entire historic triangle. So clearly the Natives led them into the Piney Swamp and continue to help them to thrive. So that story certainly gets to be told. And again, thank you all for this enlightening presentation. I really appreciate it.
Could just respond to that. That is one of my areas that's really important to me. You really see that connection up and down the East Coast, more than in other places. So like I said, you know, the Native community is pretty small. And so we have these little gatherings. And so we've had some, there was one recently in Richmond. And we, you know, got natives from the West coming over here, and they're looking at people like me, and they're like, "You're Native?" And I said, "This is East Coast." So East Coast natives look like everything, like, because this is where everybody met up, was in the East. And it was before natives put up the red flag and said, "We're not going with y'all anymore." You know what I mean? So you got, you know, white skinned natives, you got brown skinned natives, you got, you know, because there was so many different connections here in the East, and right here on the East Coast, because this was the beginning. And so you see, you know, early on, there were these amazing connections between African slaves and the natives. But if you look historically, you see the colonists working intentionally to break that up. And so by the time we get to the Emancipation Proclamation, if there hadn't been a previous connection, there wasn't one, because, you know, they started putting African Americans on the front line when they would go and raid Native, you know, colonies. They told natives, who were very spiritual people, that the Africans were cursed, and that's why they were enslaved. Like, there were a lot of different intentional things happened to break that connection. But it existed very early on, especially here in the East Coast. And so, you know, discovering those things has been very important to me, because those are my people. And it's just an important part of American history that we don't often talk about. Another thing we don't often talk about is natives on the census were called Negroes for a long time. And so for some of us who are looking back at our history, it's hard to even determine where our native ancestry is because everybody who was white was just Negro. You know what I mean? And so it's just a lot of these challenges, but they're all coming up and we've been addressing them. And so I appreciate your comment.
So I have time for one more question.
You had talked about the marriage, and my previous notion of it was that it was, escaped folks who set up their own communities and such, but you shed a light on it that it really is more of an agency type thing. So when we have communities that were set up post-emancipation in small towns across the South. We have they would call themselves the quarters and things like that. Does that fall in line with the same thought?
Thanks so much for that question, because this is something that is still being sort of worked out. The overall, I guess, easy answer is it depends. It depends on the story that was told, because in Texas, where again, 550 of these places existed, what Texas Freedom Colonies Project, Dr. Andrew Roberts always says, these were intentional places. These were not just the black side or the bottoms or the places that were unwanted. These were intentional places that these communities, these families decided to set up. Now, in Oklahoma, 50 of these communities became cities. So that was even another level of marronage, post-emancipation marronage, as we know, and sort of the traditional form of pre-emancipation marronage, that's petite marronage, grand marronage, and very different varying sort of words to describe how big and how ordered and how ordered these communities were. And that's still an ongoing conversation. So what I've started to do in my work, and this is from my supervisor, Hank Gonzalez, is sort of go back to the families themselves, right? And that can be sort of hard to do with the lack of historical record and historical archive. My first graduate degree is in oral history, so a lot of it is tracing back the oral histories of these families to see how intentional they were. And it's an ongoing process. Did I answer your question?
Yes, and will your dissertation be accessible?
If I ever finish it, sure.
Daryl's going to be doing the oral histories for the Antioch homecoming this year, which I'm very excited about. We're all excited about that. But also just, the challenge in some of this is that many of these communities were deliberately trying to be hidden for safety's sake. So even finding this historical data is even harder. It's much more challenging.
Just to back up of that, something I'm working on right now in my dissertation is that, particularly in Texas, but all throughout the US, many of these types of communities resisted integration because they have created, I won't call it utopia, but I call it landed blackness. They created their own schools, their own communities, their own churches, their own everything. And they did not want to send their kids and their fellow community members out to these white schools to be racially abused, as we see what happened with integration. But that's something that is, I think, going to be bigger than you can not even imagine now, this resisting integration, because like Pastor Brooks said, there's such an intentional effort to hide these communities that even goes on to this day. And that's another conversation.
One more question? No discussion?
I was interested in whether or not in your work you talked about the pronunciation, that looked at families formerly enslaved and free families that not only moved intentionally to different areas, but set up areas in Mexico, right across the Mexican border. I, for example, just found out within the last couple of years that Juneteenth was celebrated in places in Mexico before here. So I'm just wondering if there's a connection across borders that way as well.
So that definitely is, yes. Not only is there a connection, there's a more, so, Roberta Flack just passed, and I was at her memorial. Her family descends from Hillside in North Carolina, outside of Asheville, which is a freedom colony, an Appalachian freedom colony. And Felicia Rashad spoke there, and Felicia Rashad's family descends from many Texas freedom colonies. But Felicia talks about this too a lot, in many different videos, that her mother, took her after their father's divorce, her and her siblings to Mexico because it was a safer space to be for Black people. And there's a whole Black community in Mexico, and of course, all kinds of Maroons in Mexico. And I just thought that was very fascinating to have Roberta Flack be memorialized by Felicia Rashad just last Monday or 2 Mondays ago. And those two, both their families descend from these types of communities. And of course, Rashad's family. You can Google it. She talks about how her mother took them to Mexico for that reason.
From El Paso, Texas, grew up 4 generations in Segunda Barrio.
Oh,
El
wow.
Paso, so.
Well, my dad is from Big Sandy, Texas. He's here with me today. And of course, Elam Springs, I say it wrong now. Elam Springs is also a freedom colony that his family farm is still in to this day. So yeah, there's all these connections in Texas. We could go, that could be a whole nother sort of symposium. So.
Certainly invite you guys to continue that conversation at our reception, which starts 2 minutes ago. But nonetheless, thank you guys again